Carry it or leave it, Pharaoh. You've got 2 good legs and 1 job, and thinking ain't part of it. Staff Sergeant Grady Rennick said it loud, the way he said everything, so the whole motor pool would hear and the whole motor pool would laugh. He dropped his ruck at her boots like he was feeding a dog. Nell Pharaoh bent, took the weight onto her small shoulders without a sound, and settled it. 40 extra pounds on a frame that already looked too slight for the rest of the kit she hauled. She did not glare. She did not answer. She counted her breath the way she'd been taught, in for 4 and out for 6. And she looked at the ridgeline past the wire the way another woman might look at a clock. The men called her the Mule. They'd been calling her that since the day she got assigned to Rennick's marksman element as the ammo bearer, the water bearer, the one who broke down and carried the spotting scope, and the tripod, and the extra belts, while the real shooters walked light. She let them. She had a small green data book in her chest pocket, soft-cornered from use, and in it were numbers. Ranges to every rock and ruin along the Sargar Road. Wind at dawn and wind at dusk. The way the mirage boiled off the black stone by 10 in the morning. She logged it on the boring runs, the resupply crawls when everyone else was half asleep, and nobody ever asked her why. She did not yet know that in 9 days, every man laughing at her would owe his life to what was written in that book. She only knew the numbers were true, and that the day was coming when true numbers would matter more than a loud voice. Before we go further, if a woman being handed the gear and then handed the whole war sounds like your kind of story, do this now. Hit subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments, because I want to see how far this one travels. Stay all the way to the end, because there is a single shot near dusk, moving target, failing light, that 90 men swore was a lie until a camera proved it, and you do not want to hear about it secondhand. Now let's go back to the valley. The Donavar Valley was all dry stone and heat, a place the sun hammered flat by 9, and the wind cut cold by night, and no snow ever, just dust that got into the teeth and the rifle and the soul. The outpost sat on a shelf above the Sargar Road, a horseshoe of sandbags and shipping containers and one crooked antenna. From the sandbags, you could see the whole run of the road where it threaded the ruins of Koband, a dead town of mud walls and one standing minaret. And beyond it, the pass where the relief convoys came through. Nell had walked every foot of that ground with 60 pounds on her back. She'd ranged the minarets at 410. She'd ranged the gap between the 2 tall ruins at the town's edge at 640, and she'd clocked how long a running man took to cross it. She wrote that down, too. Nobody asked. What her file said, if anyone had opened it, was this. Before the uniform, she'd shot precision rifle for 11 years, since she was a kid on a dry ranch with a coyote problem, and a coach 2 counties over, who didn't believe in praise. Dot Halloran, 61 years old, hands like fence wire, still alive, and still meaner than the weather, running a range out of a converted dairy barn. Dot had taken one look at teenage Nell, missing easy plates, and told her the truth nobody tells girls. The rifle does not care how you feel. Do the math, then trust the math, and shut your mouth. Nell had called her twice from theater on the satellite phone. Both times, Dot had asked about her dope and hung up before goodbye. Dot's whole philosophy fit in 4 words, Nell said to herself now, settling the ruck, watching the ridge. Nobody argues with a hit. Rennick could shoot. That was the thing people missed about men like him. He was genuinely good, a real marksman, plates out to 800 on a calm day, and he knew it. And he'd decided a long time ago that being good gave him the right to decide who else was allowed to be. He'd looked at Nell, small, quiet, female, and he'd decided. It wasn't ignorance. It was a choice he made loud, every day, in front of an audience. That first week, there was a scene by the ammo point that told the whole story. Rennick had a group of the younger men gathered while he zeroed, and he waved Nell over to hold his data card because his hands were full. And when she read the wind call off it before he could, read it correctly, called it in half a breath, he took the card back and said slow, so they'd all hear it, that the mule could read letters, would wonders never cease. They laughed. She said nothing. She walked back to her gear and kept it moving. The one man who didn't laugh was the motor sergeant Elias Pardo, a wiry old warrant with 30 years and a bad shoulder, who ran the vehicles and missed nothing. Pardo had watched Nell on the range one evening when she thought she was alone, plinking a busted radiator at what, he paced off later, at nearly 700, one-handed, with a beat-up rack rifle. Hit after hit after hit. No drama, no smile, like she was hammering nails. He never said a word about it. But after that, when Rennick called her the mule, Pardo's jaw would set. And once he muttered to himself, "That girl is not what they think she is." And he went back to his engine. He didn't understand what he'd seen. He just knew it didn't fit. There was a second scene, a quieter one, that mattered later. The relief that came through the pass was mostly medical, a small convoy of trucks that ran wounded and civilian medical staff up to the clinic at the far village and back. On one crossing, a specialist named Rafika Nasser rode down to the outpost to swap supplies. Rafi, late 20s, an interpreter and medic both, who kept a photo of a little bakery storefront on her phone, because that was the plan, after. A bakery back home, and a daughter she'd teach to bake. The daughter safe with her mother, 1,000 miles from any of this. Rafi and Nell traded maybe 40 words over a crate of saline. Rafi asked what was in the little green book. Nell said, "Numbers." Rafi laughed and said, she liked a person who kept their own numbers. That was all. It didn't seem like anything. Most of the things that save your life don't, until they do. And a third scene. The day before, it all came apart. Rennick's element got the warning order. Enemy movement in Koband, a heavy weapon suspected in the ruins, and a big relief convoy, wounded, medical staff, 40 souls, scheduled to cross the exposed run of the Sargar Road in 3 days. The element would move down into an overwatch position among the ruins, confirm the threat, and hold the road open. Rennick briefed it like a man narrating his own legend. He assigned the mule to carry the second rifle, the spare barrel, 400 rounds, the tripod, and the water. She'd hump it and hand it up and stay out of the way. Captain Doyle stood at the back of that brief, the company commander, a decent enough officer who'd let Rennick run wild because Rennick got results, and complaining was work. Doyle saw Nell loaded down like a pack animal and said nothing. Silence from the man in charge is just permission, wearing a cleaner uniform. She caught his eye once. He looked away first. They moved before dawn on the third day, down off the shelf and into the dead town, 6 shooters and 1 mule, into the cool blue dark that smelled of dust and cold stone. And that was when the whole plan came apart. It came apart the way real things do, all at once and out of order. They were still moving into position among the ruins, strung out along a wall, when the first machine gun opened up from a rooftop nobody had cleared. The sound of it slammed off the mud walls and doubled and tripled until the whole town seemed to be firing. Rennick's point man went down behind cover. Then a second gun answered from the far side, an interlock. A trap sprung early, because someone up there was patient and good. Rounds walked along the top of the wall in a line of little bursting impacts, throwing grit. The elements scattered into the ruins in ones and twos, and inside 90 seconds the neat plan on Doyle's map was just men pinned in separate holes, shouting. Rennick took a hit in the same first minute. Not fatal, but his shooting arm, high, and it put him down hard behind a low wall with his rifle 3 feet out of reach in the open and a machine gun keeping it there. 2 of his shooters were pinned flat 40 meters off and couldn't lift their heads. One was dragging the point man back by his drag strap into a doorway. The radio was a wall of overlapping voices and static. Nell was behind the same low wall as Rennick, down in the dust with the second rifle across her back. The spare, the one she'd carried. A good rifle, nobody had let her fire. She had a clear read on the situation in about 4 seconds, the way you read a match in the first stage, cold. The near gun was on the rooftop of the standing house at the town's edge. She'd ranged that house, 320 meters. The gunner was exposed from the chest up behind a lip of mud brick, working the far shooters. The far gun was tucked deeper, harder. First things first. She looked at Rennick. He was gray, breathing through his teeth, his good hand clamped on his bad arm, and he was staring at her like he'd forgotten who she was. "Give me the net," she said. He didn't move. She reached over and took the hand mic off his kit, thumbed it, and made the call that a lot of men on that net would remember the rest of their lives, because the voice was flat and level, and it did not belong to anyone they'd been calling the mule. "All stations, this is Pharaoh. I have the gun. Everybody stay down and stay off the net. I'm working." Up at the outpost, in the little plywood operations room, Captain Doyle stood over the radio with the report in his ears that Rennick was down, and the element was pinned in the open with a convoy inbound in 72 hours and no shooter. And into that came a woman's voice saying she had the gun. Doyle keyed up, and you could hear him make the decision cost him something, because to say the next words was to admit that the man he'd let run everything was on the ground, and the person he'd let get called a mule was the only rifle he had left. "Pharaoh," he said, "this is 6. You are cleared to engage. The road is yours. Do you copy?" "Copy," she said. "Road's mine." She rolled to the base of the wall, unslung the spare, and went to work. The first thing was the near gun on the rooftop at 320. She didn't rush it. She built her position in the dust behind the low wall, got the bipod down on a flat stone she could feel was solid, dropped behind the glass, and there he was, the gunner, chest up, hammering the far shooters, not thinking about the little wall across the street, because nobody had shot from it yet. 320, no wind to speak of in the dawn cool, a shot she could make in her sleep. She let her breath out to the bottom, the way Dot drilled into her 10,000 times. Do the math and trust it, and she broke the shot clean. The rifle cracked, sharp and high, a different sound entirely from the deep hammer of the machine guns, and across the street the gun stopped. Just stopped. "That's 1, she said, to no one, and moved. The far gun found her inside 20 seconds. That was the first bad moment. She'd fired, and a good enemy learns fast, and the deeper gun swung off the pinned shooters and onto her wall, and the world came apart around her head. The rounds came in a rising line, and she felt the wall shudder against her chest as the impacts walked toward her, felt grit sting her cheek, and the flat concussion of near misses press her eardrums. Heard the sick, fast crack, crack, crack of rounds passing a hand's width over her spine. Felt the sun not yet fully up, and the cold stone under her forearms, and her own heart going, and the taste of dust. She saw, in the half-second she had, exactly where the far gun was. A slit in a wall, deep in shadow, maybe 560, a hard shot into a hole. And she saw that if she stayed on this wall for one more breath, she was finished, because the line of impacts was almost on her. So she did the math on the move, rolled left off the flat stone as the wall where she'd been came apart, dragged the rifle with her, and came up 8 feet down behind a fallen roof beam, with her heart slamming, and the dust in her throat, alive, repositioned, before the gunner could correct. The far gun chewed the empty wall where she'd been. She let it. She counted her breath back down, 4 in, 6 out. "He's in the slit on the north wall," she said into the mic, calm, watching. "Somebody mark it so I don't waste rounds. Anybody got eyes?" And that was the empty channel. She waited. Nothing came back. The net hissed with dead air, and the far gun hammered, and somewhere a man was screaming for a corpsman, and no one answered her, and for 3 long seconds she was completely alone with a gun she couldn't quite see, and the whole town trying to kill her. She thumbed the mic again. "Anybody? Give me a mark." Static. The dread of it sat cold in her chest, worse than the rounds. The specific fear of being the only one still up and having no one to hand the weight to. Then Rennick's voice, ragged, from behind the low wall, closer than she thought. "North wall," he ground out. "Second slit from the corner. He's deep, 560, maybe 70. I ranged it yesterday." A pause, and then the thing it cost him to say, "You can make it." "I can't. Make it." She made it, 560, into a black slit the width of a mail slot. A shot most shooters would call luck if they made it once in 10. She read the light, added for the deeper distance, held for the drop she knew cold off the numbers in her book, and she waited for the muzzle flash to bloom in the dark of the slit, and put her round a hand's width above, and left of it while it was still glowing. The crack of her rifle and the stop of the far gun came so close together they sounded like one thing. Then there was only her own breathing, and the wind starting to move as the sun came up. "That's 2, she said. But 2 guns down was not the end of it, because the men who'd set the trap were still in the ruins, and now they knew exactly where she was, and they came for the wall. This is where the next hour went, and it went in fragments. Movement in the alley left. She took it, a fast, close shot at 90 meters. No math needed, just nerve. The report flat and quick. 3. A man breaking from the minaret's base toward the pinned shooters. She'd ranged the minaret at 410. She didn't even have to think. Hold and press. And he dropped and did not get up. 4. She moved every few shots, wall to beam to doorway, never firing twice from the same stone, the way Dot taught her to shoot a field match. Position is life. Never love a spot. The rounds came back at her each time, and each time she was already gone. She reloaded from the 400 rounds she'd carried herself, her own mule load, feeding the rifle she'd humped for a man who couldn't lift it now. The count climbed. She called it herself, flat, because there was no one else to. 5, 6. A pair trying to flank along the dry ditch. 7 and 8. 2 shots so close together, the second was in the air before the first man fell. She was breathing steady. Her hands were steady. Her eyes had gone flat and calculating the way Pardo had seen them on the range that evening. And the men who'd laughed at the mule lay pinned and listened to a rifle they'd carried past 100 times saved their lives, one round at a time. There was a second bad moment, worse than the first. Around the 20th minute, low on the rounds in the current magazine, she shifted to a new position at the base of a broken stair, and she misjudged the shadow. There was a shooter she hadn't cleared, close, maybe 40 meters, in the doorway above, and to her right, and he had her cold. She felt it before she saw it, that animal prickle, and she looked up into a muzzle already swinging onto her, and there was no time to bring her own rifle around, no time at all. And in that stretched half-second, she saw the man's face and the dark bore of his weapon, and the dust hanging in the light between them. And she thought, clear as a bell, not like this. What saved her was Rennick. One-armed, gray. He'd dragged himself and his rifle to the low wall, and he fired past her with his weak hand, a wild, bad shot that missed the man, but cracked the doorframe by his head and made him flinch. And that flinch was the quarter second Nell needed to twist and bring her rifle up and end it at 40 meters. 9. She lay there, one beat, chest heaving, dust in her teeth, alive on a stranger's flinch and a broken man's charity. Even now, Rennick said from the wall, and it wasn't a joke. It was almost an apology already forming. Even now, you're faster than me. Thank you, she said, and meant the shot, not the words, and got back to work. By the time the quick reaction force ground its way down from the outpost, and the last of the enemy melted back into the high ground, the Count stood where she'd called it, out loud, one at a time. It would be confirmed later against the bodies and the sensor feeds, and it would come out to 22. 22 from a woman who'd been sent to carry water. But that number is not the point of the day. The point of the day was the man she found when it went quiet. Because when the guns stopped, and she finally lowered the rifle and looked around, she saw that one of the trucks that had tried to push down into the fight had taken fire and slumped against its wheel. In the shade of the wall was Rafi Nasser, the interpreter, the medic, the woman with the bakery on her phone. She'd been hit badly, low, and she was fading. Her face gone the color of the dust, her hands slack, and there was no corpsman up yet because the corpsman was pinned, and the men around her didn't know what to do with their hands. Nell knew what to do with hers. The same hands that had just threaded around into a black slit at 560. She got down in the dirt next to Rafi and worked fast and sure, packing the wound the way you learn to when you grow up 2 hours from a hospital with a father who works cattle, cinching, pressing, talking low the whole time. She didn't look at the wound as a horror. She looked at it as a problem, the way she looked at everything, and her hands did not shake. Rafi's eyes found her. Her voice was very small. "Am I going to die here?" she said, not dramatic, just a woman who wanted the truth from someone who kept her own numbers. Nell held her eyes and gave her the truth as a fact, the way you'd call a range. "No, you've got a bakery to open. You're going to open it. I've got you." "You've got me," Rafi repeated, like she was learning it. "I've got you," Nell said. "Breathe with me. In for 4. She kept her talking and kept her breathing and kept the pressure on all the way until the corpsman broke free and got there. And then the two of them held Rafi together until the bird came in low over the ruins, its rotors slapping the walls into a roar that swallowed everything, and they got her aboard. Rafi's hand caught Nell's wrist as they lifted her and held it and let go, and the bird lifted away. She lived. Hold that. Whatever else you carry out of this, hold that. She lived. And here is where a story usually ends, with the mule proven and the wounded saved and the enemy driven off. But it didn't end there, because the convoy was still coming, the real one. 40 souls, wounded, and medical staff, scheduled to cross the exposed run of the Sargar Road through Cove Band in 2 days. And the thing the enemy had wanted the whole time was that road, that crossing, that killing ground. What came apart in the ruins had only been the opening move. They found it the next evening. A patrol clearing the far edge of Cove Band caught the glint of it too late. A heavy machine gun, a big one, the kind that eats trucks, set up in the stone shell of the old caravanserai on the north side of the road. A hardened nest with a firing slit facing directly onto the one stretch of road the convoy could not avoid. 640 meters from the outpost's own overwatch to that slit. Nell knew the number without checking. She'd ranged the caravanserai on a boring resupply run 3 weeks earlier, and written it in the little green book, 640 to the north face. And beside it, she'd noted the gap, the alley between the caravanserai and the collapsed wall next to it, where the road forced anything to swing wide. She'd measured that gap at the time, out of pure habit, because measuring things was what she did, instead of talking. 12 meters across. She did not yet know why she'd need it. Now she knew. They put the whole thing on the map that night in the operations room, and the map said the convoy was dead. The nest was hardened. The gun crew stayed deep behind the slit, invisible, only the muzzle showing, and there was no angle from anywhere. Friendly to shoot into that slit before the gun opened up and shredded 40 people. Air was weathered out for the crossing window. Artillery couldn't be cleared with the convoy that close and the village beyond. Delaying meant leaving the wounded to die where they were staged. It was a box with no lid. And here is the other thing that had changed. Nell was not solo anymore. Around the map that night stood the survivors of the ruins, and they were not looking at her like the mule. Rennick was there, his arm in a sling, quiet. Pardo, the old motor sergeant, who'd invited himself. Corporal Tom Ashby, one of the pinned shooters, who read ground like a book. Private Lun Saka, the comms man, patched into every net. Captain Doyle. And the thing that had formed in the ruins, the thing that made this a team, and not one woman alone, was that every one of them had heard her flat voice on the net saying the road was hers, and believed it now. She'd earned a team the only way that lasts. She'd done the work in front of them. "There's no shot into the slit," Ashby said, and he wasn't arguing. He was thinking aloud with her. "He's too deep. Only thing that ever shows is the muzzle." "The gunner shows," Nell said. She had the little green book open on the map, her finger on the gap. "Not at the slit. Here." And this is the read that unlocked the whole thing. And it didn't come from wind, or a lull, or a window in the weather. It came from geometry, and from a team putting 4 sets of eyes on one problem. Nell laid it out. When the convoy came through, the lead vehicle would force the crew to swing the heavy gun hard left to track it down the road, and to swing that far, in that cramped stone nest, the gunner had to lean his whole upper body out past the protection of the slit, into the open, for the length of the swing. She'd seen big guns fought in tight spaces. She knew the geometry of it. And the swing would carry him across the 12-meter gap she'd measured, the alley mouth, where for one pass, one time, he'd be fully exposed against the light. Not a repeating cycle. One pass, one heartbeat, moving as the convoy's own lead truck dragged his aim across the open gap. Ashby saw it and went pale and nodded. Sokka ran the timing off the convoy's speed and the road. Rennick, the man who'd have called this fantasy a week ago, studied the geometry with his one good hand, flat on the map, and said, Quiet. That's real. That's a real read. Doyle looked around the room at the men agreeing with the mule and made his second hard decision. He put Nell in the overwatch with her team to make the shot, and he said it plainly, in front of everyone, that Corporal Farrow had the shot and the road, and no one so much as blinked. That was the whole cost of it, and he paid it out loud, which is more than most men ever manage. But the enemy in the caravanserai was good, and good men do not sit still. Just before the crossing window, they must have caught a glint of the overwatch, because they put fire onto Nell's position. Not the heavy gun, they held that for the convoy, but a rifleman on the flank, and one of his rounds caught Nell across the outside of the left forearm as she built her position, a hard graze that tore her sleeve and burned like a brand and made the whole arm shake. That was the third time the day tried to kill her, and it did the cruelest thing it could. It hit her support arm 2 minutes before the only shot that mattered. She went flat behind the rock, and for a stretched moment there was only the burn and the shake and the blood slicking her forearm, and the light going orange and low as the sun dropped toward the ridge, and the taste of dust, and the far-off growl of the convoy's engines climbing toward the crossing, and the cold arithmetic in her head refusing to stop even as her arm screamed at her. Ashby had his hand on the flank shooter with his own rifle in the next breath, and Soka was shouting the convoy was 90 seconds out, and Nell lay there and did the only math that counted. Could she hold the rifle with a shaking arm? Answer, yes, if she rested it hard on the rock and took her support arm out of the equation and let the stone do the work. So she did that. She built the rest off the rock, jaw set, and took the trembling limb out of the problem. Do the math. Trust the math. Shut your mouth. Then the call came, and it came from the one voice she never expected. Because the plan had a flaw only Rennick could fix. From Nell's spot, the alley gap was foreshortened. She could see the road, but not the exact instant the lead truck would drag the gunner across the open. Ashby had the better angle on the gap, but couldn't make the shot. So the read had to be handed off, spotter to shooter. And the man they put on the glass, because his eye was best and steadiest, even one-armed, was Grady Rennick. The man who'd called her the mule was going to call her shot. There was a silence before he keyed up. A long one, 3 seconds of dead air, while the convoy's engines swelled, and everyone waited. And you could feel what it cost him to speak. Because to call her shot was to say in front of God and the whole net that she was the shooter and he was the spotter, and that this was right. Then he keyed the mic, and his voice was not loud anymore. It was quiet and deliberate, and every word cost him. Farrow, Rennick, I'm your eyes. Lead trucks at the gap in 5. He's going to swing. When he crosses the open, I'll call it. 40 souls on this, Farrow. 40. You're the only rifle that makes this shot, and we both know it. A pause, and then barely. Make it. I've got your call. Every man on the net heard him name her the shooter. Pardo, listening from the motor pool net, took his cap off. Doyle closed his eyes. Copy, Nell said. On your call. And then everything went quiet in that particular way, the way the whole world narrows to one small bright circle, and the impossible thing came due. 640 meters. A moving target, a man swinging with a heavy gun, crossing a 12-meter gap, exposed for maybe 1 full second at the speed the lead truck would drag him. Failing light, the sun a hand's width off the ridge, and the shadows long and blue in the gap. A wounded support arm she'd taken out of the problem, resting the rifle dead on the rock. ammunition down to the rounds in one magazine. And the enemy, who now knew roughly where she was and would find her the instant she fired if she missed. She had one shot before the heavy gun found the convoy. One. She opened the little green book to the page with 640 and the gap and the 12 meters, and she did not press it to her chest. She read it, the numbers she'd written on a boring day when she was only the mule. She dialed the elevation for 640 off her own dope, the drop she knew cold. She built the lead in her head from the gap and the truck's speed Soka had called. A moving man, right to left, she'd need to hold off his leading edge. Lead him like the coyotes on the ranch, like the running man she'd once timed across a gap, just like this one. And Dot's voice was in her ear, not soft, not folksy, just the truth. Do the math, then trust it. She settled the rifle into the rock. She let her breath out to the bottom. She put the reticle at the empty air on the left side of the gap, where the math said he would be, not where he was, and she waited with her finger taking up the slack. The convoy engines roared. The lead truck's nose came into the far edge of the gap. In the stone nest 640 meters away, the heavy gun began to swing left to track it, and the gunner leaned out past the slit into the open, into the last orange light, crossing the gap, moving exactly where she'd said he'd be. Now, Rennick said. Now, now, now. She broke the shot. The rifle cracked, a clean high report that rolled down the valley and off the walls of Koband, and the round crossed 640 meters of failing light in less than a second, and it met the moving man in the open gap where the math had put him, ahead of where the eye said, and the heavy gun that was about to open on 40 wounded souls stopped mid-swing and did not fire. It hung there in the gap, silent, its swing dead. The convoy ground on through the crossing untouched. 40 souls who never knew how close. And the last light went off the ridge, and it was done. For a second, there was no sound at all on the net. Then Ashby, hoarse, "Hit! Confirmed hit! The gun's down! The gun's down! Road's open!" Rennick didn't say anything for a while. When he did, it was 2 words, and they weren't loud. "My God!" Nell laid her forehead against the cool stock for one breath, her wounded arm finally allowed to shake, and closed the little green book and keyed the mic. "That's the last one," she said. "Convoy's clear, coming off the glass." The count from the ruins had already been resolved, checked against the bodies and the feeds, a whole number that Doyle read off a page and had to read twice. 22 from the first operation, called out loud one at a time by the woman on the wall. But the shot at the gap was its own thing, separate. And when word of it climbed the chain, the men who hadn't been there did the natural thing. They called it a lie. 640, moving target, 1 second of exposure, failing light, a graze on her support arm. Impossible, they said, in the ready rooms and the higher headquarters. A story the outpost cooked up because they were embarrassed a female ammo bearer had done the shooting. You could not blame them. Exactly. It was not a believable thing. So here is how it got proven. And it did not get proven by a skeptic pacing off a range. Ashby's spotting scope had been running a recorder, a small camera clamped to the eyepiece, the way Overwatch elements log their engagements now. The whole thing was on it, time-stamped and clear. The convoy's lid truck at the gap, the heavy gun beginning its swing, the gunner leaning out into the open, and then the exact frame where he stopped, and the road going quiet, and 40 vehicles rolling through. The footage went up the chain. Independent of that, Soka's net recording caught Rennick's call, and the timing, and Nell's flat copy, the whole handoff, voices that didn't match a cooked-up story. And the physical evidence at the gap, when a patrol reached it, matched the geometry exactly: the position of the fallen gun, the angle, the range confirmed by the patrol's own instrument at 641 meters, 1 meter off the number she'd written in her book weeks before she ever needed it. 3 separate mechanisms, footage and net traffic, and the ground itself, all saying the same impossible thing. The men who'd called it a lie went quiet. There is no arguing with a hit. Dot had always said so. They came back up to the outpost in the last of the light, and Nell walked in under her own kit for once, her arm wrapped, and the space by the sandbags where Rennick had thrown his ruck at her feet 9 days before was the same space, the same crooked antenna, the same view of the ridge going dark, and that was where the reckoning happened. Rennick was waiting for her there. His arm was in the sling and his loud was all gone. He stood in front of her, this big man who'd built his whole self on being the best shooter and the loudest voice. And he could not, for a long moment, get a word out. He started and stopped. He looked at the ground. When it finally came, it came halting and raw, restarting mid-sentence, costing him visibly, his throat working. I don't have the... He stopped, started again. I called you the mule, in front of everybody, every day, and you carried my gun to a fight, and then you... His voice broke, and he pushed through it. You saved my whole element. You saved that convoy. You saved my life with a shot I couldn't make on the best day I ever had. And I spent 9 days telling everyone you were nothing. He made himself look at her. His eyes were wet, and he didn't wipe them. I was wrong about you in a way I don't have the words to fix. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I just need you to hear me say it. I was wrong, out loud, in the same place I was wrong the first time. The men in earshot had gone still. This was the thing they'd all wanted to see, and none of them had believed they'd get. Nell looked at him for a moment, this humbled man who had once fired a wild, bad shot with his weak hand to buy her a quarter second and her life. She didn't gloat. She didn't twist it. She gave him the same thing she gave everyone, the truth, short and level, the words she'd write in a book. You bought me a second in that doorway, she said. I'm still here because of it. We're square. That was it. That was all. And it was enough, because it was true. And Rennick took it like a man taking a weight off, and nodded, and could not speak again for a while. Captain Doyle's part was brief, and it should have been, because he'd already paid his real price out loud on the net when it counted. He came to her the next morning, the enabling silence finally broken, and he didn't make a speech. He told her she was done carrying anyone's water. He was giving her her own Overwatch element, her pick of shooters, and putting her up for the recognition the shot deserved. And he'd already signed the paper, moving her out from under any man who'd ever call her a name. I watched it happen, and I said nothing, he said. That's on me. This is me not doing that anymore. She said, appreciate it, sir, and let him have the peace of having finally done the right thing, because there was no profit in denying it to him. Pardo, the old motor sergeant, was the one who put it plainest, and he did it days later, when Rafi Nasser, alive, patched, out of danger, the bakery still ahead of her, sent word down from the clinic. Rafi's message was for the small, quiet woman who'd knelt in the dust and made her a promise like it was a fact. Pardo delivered it in the motor pool, wiping his hands on a rag, and his voice was rough. She says to tell you she's naming the bakery after the thing you said. She says you told her you had her, and you did. And now every loaf that comes out of that oven is because a woman everybody called the mule decided the numbers in her little book meant somebody's daughter still had a mother. He looked at Nell. I saw you shoot that radiator at 700 with a busted rifle, and I knew you weren't what they said. I just didn't know you were this. He shook his head. You're the reason 40 people slept in their own beds. That's what you are. Nell didn't have a speech either. She never did. When one of the newer men, who hadn't been there, made a crack in the chow line a week later about the little woman getting lucky, it was Rennick who turned around, quiet, and said, She measured that gap 3 weeks before there was a fight, kid. There's no luck in her. Sit down and learn something. And he sat back down, and that was the change, shown in one small, hard action instead of a speech, the loud man using what was left of his voice to guard hers. The theme of the whole thing, if it had a theme, wasn't complicated, and Nell said it once to Ashby when he asked how she'd stayed so calm with 40 lives on one shaking-armed shot. She thought about it, and she gave him the truest thing she had, the thing Dot beat into her in a dairy barn a lifetime ago. A loud voice can talk over you all day, she said. It can call you anything it wants, but it can't argue with a hit. The work is the one thing nobody gets to shout down. So I stopped talking a long time ago, and I just did the work, and I let the work do the arguing. The last light was going off the ridge, the way it had in the cold open, the same shelf and the same sandbags and the same view. Somewhere far off, in a headquarters where men had called her a liar, the certainty was collapsing frame by frame as the footage played and played, 6:40, and a moving man, and 1 second of light. And up on the shelf, Nell Farrow shouldered her kit now, her rifle, no one else's water, and walked toward the wire with her eyes level and her breathing slow. In for 4, and out for 6, small and quiet and utterly unbothered. The little green book back in her chest pocket, full of numbers that were true. She wasn't carrying their gear anymore. She was carrying the whole valley home, and she made it look like nothing at all.